Enduro bikes have grown increasingly popular over the past few years, and for good reason. They descended nearly as well as full-fledged downhill bikes, and some can even rival the climbing ability of a short travel trail bike. But not all Enduro bikes are created equally, so in this video we've chosen our favorite for 5 different categories. Now, the criteria we use when choosing these bikes differs just a little bit from category to category. We'll talk about what that was as we go. But keep in mind that there are dozens of exceptional bikes in the market these days, and this is simply our list. So if you'd have chosen something different, go ahead and let us know what it is in the comments. Now though, let's kick it off with our first category, the best enduro race bike. For this award, we look for a bike that splits the balance between outright speed and technical terrain with handling that's nimble and quick enough for tight enduro stages. We also looked for a part spec that's performance oriented enough that it could, in theory, compete at the top of the sport, but not so fancy that you're going to be afraid to get a scratch on it. And lastly, we wanted our bike to come from a company that has a successful track record in elite enduro racing. And after all that, we settled on the Orbea Rayon M10, a 170mm carbon fiber bike listing for $6,599. Martin Mays has had a ton of success on this bike over the past few years and has already secured himself a podium finish in the 2024 EDR World Cup. In terms of geometry, the Rayon gets a flip chip that adjusts the head tube angle by half a degree and the reach by a whopping 15mm. In its low setting, it has a head tube angle of 63.5 degrees paired with some relatively long 440mm chainstays, which collectively give the bike plenty of stability at high speed. On the flip side, the Rayon has a relatively short reach. In its low setting, it's just 460mm. And some riders may find that to be a bit cramped, but it's definitely going to make for a more maneuverable bike, again in that more technical terrain. Now, the Rayon is available in 5 different sizes, and all of those sizes come stock with a mixed wheel setup, or in other words, a 27.5-inch wheel in the back and a 29-inch wheel up front. But Orbea does give you a separate shock yoke included with the bike that makes it so you can run a 29-inch wheel in the back. A good enduro race bike not only has to get you down the mountain quickly, but also get you back up with minimal energy loss so that you can put that towards your next enduro stage. And thankfully, the Rayon has continually been praised for its good climbing performance. 2 other things we love about this bike are the in-frame storage compartment and massive dropper post insertion. Orbea says you can run a 200mm post fully slammed in a size small frame. Next, let's talk components. And while $6,600 isn't cheap by any stretch of the imagination, we do think that this bike packs a pretty dang good value and could probably keep up with bikes that cost twice as much. Suspension is taken care of by Fox with a 170mm 38 performance fork paired with a Flow X performance shock that delivers 167mm of travel in the back. You'll also get a Shimano XT group set, and arguably the biggest highlight, a set of OQ mountain control carbon fiber wheels, greatly helping reduce the bike's weight. These are wrapped by a tire combination we're going to see popping up a lot in today's video, and that's a Maxxis Assegai in the front and a Minion DHR2 in the rear. In total, we're going to give the Rayon 4 out of 5 goats. While its part spec isn't quite on par with some other similarly priced bikes on the market, we think the well-designed lightweight frame, combined with its great pedaling performance, makes it a really good option for folks who are looking to get into, again, enduro racing. 2 other bikes worth considering are the surprisingly well-equipped Pivot Firebird Brunch Ride and the Canyon Strive CFR Underdog. But what if racing isn't really your jam and you'd rather spend your time lapping the bike park or maybe filming for your next free ride edit? Well then, our next category, the best bike park bike, is for you. Here, we look for bikes that blend the line between enduro and downhill rigs, even if it means compromising just a little bit on their weight and pedaling performance. And speaking of weight, we've also decided to choose bikes that have a bit lower part spec. Not so much that they're going to be unreliable or falling apart on the trail, but that you're not going to be super worried when you have to pay to replace that derailleur from when you dropped your bike trying to do a bar spin. In the end, we settled on the $3,654 Propane Spindrift AL MX Start, a big name for an even bigger bike. The Spindrift comes with 180mm of travel front and rear, and as the name would imply, we chose the mullet build for this test. But you can also pick it up as a full 29 or 27.5. 2 things you won't find on this bike are in-frame storage or adjustable geometry, which again I think highlights the fact that this bike is definitely focused more towards the freeride crowd. And speaking of freeride, despite its long travel, the geometry here is a bit more on the conservative side of the spectrum. You're going to get a 64.5 degree head tube angle, 335mm chainstays, and a 475mm reach on the size large, all of which should keep it plenty fun and playful on those jump lines. Despite being the least expensive Spindrift available, the Start model that we chose for this list still comes with some pretty dang good components that, again, not only make for a reliable ride, but also help keep the weight at a respectable 34.4 pounds or 15.6 kilograms. At the front of the bike, you'll find a 180mm RockShox Zeb Select Plus fork and a RockShox Super Deluxe Select Air Shock in the back. You'll also get a SRAM GX drivetrain, G2 brakes, and Newman Performance alloy wheels wrapped in Schwalbe Magic Mary tires. One drawback to this part spec is that it actually does not come with a dropper post. So if you plan on doing anything besides shuttle or bike park riding, then that's an upgrade you want to make pretty early on. But if any of those components, including the lack of dropper post, doesn't exactly suit your liking, then don't worry about it, because Propane actually has a really cool configurator tool that lets you essentially build an entirely custom bike, meaning you can splurge in the areas that matter to you while saving elsewhere. That customizability, combined with the bike's freeride-oriented geometry, and even if you stick with those stock components, relatively good value for your money, is going to earn the Propane a near perfect 4.5 out of 5 goats. And if you're interested in the more slope-style oriented side of freeride, like Propane's own Carson Storch, then I really can't think of a better bike for you. That said, it might not be as ideal for more big mountain riders or free racers. For that, you may be more interested in our runner-up, the Norco Shore 2, and for those looking for maximal geometry adjustment, check out the brand new Marin Alpine Trail XR. Our third category is what we're calling the best all-around enduro bike. And by that, we mean a long travel enduro sled that's not gonna suck too bad to pedal around on a trail ride. And while we could have chosen one of the many great 150mm aggressive trail bikes, like the Ibis Ritmo AF or Specialized Stump Jumper Evo, in this video, we wanted to stick with something more in that 170mm range. We also chose to go with a bike with a bit higher part spec than a lot of the other ones on this list. The argument being that if you're only gonna have one bike, you might as well splurge there just a little bit. And after all that was said and done, we ended up landing on the Ibis HD6 GX transmission, which lists for $7,799 and weighs just 32 pounds or 14.5 kilograms, which is lighter than many trail bikes. But don't worry, the HD6 is far from a 180mm XC bike. Still has pretty dang aggressive geometry, highlighted by the 64-degree head tube angle and long 480mm reach in the size large. The bike does, however, have some relatively short 335mm chainstays across all 5 sizes, which should make it more manageable on slower tech and more fun on mellower flow trails. Unlike a lot of the other bikes on today's list, the HD6 doesn't have any geometry adjustment and it's only compatible with the 27.5/29 MX wheel setup that it comes with. So for those of you who like to tinker with your bike setup, it might not be the one for you. Another omission that we would have liked to see on a bike at this price point is in-frame storage, but I'm sure that leaving it out played a part in keeping the weight as low as it is. One of the things that makes the HD6 such a versatile bike is its DW Link suspension, which has been praised for its climbing performance for years. And despite having 165mm of travel in the back, the HD6 is no exception. Suspension duties are a full Fox factory ordeal on the GX transmission build with a 180mm 38 fork and Float X2 shock. As the name would imply, it also comes with a SRAM GX T-Type drivetrain and Code RSC brakes. Lastly, the bike rolls on a pair of in-house Ibis Blackbird Send wheels with a Maxxis Assegai up front and DHR2 in the rear. If I'm honest, the idea of using a 165mm bike as your one bike quiver is a bit foreign to me. But if your terrain and riding style demand it, then I think the HD6 is a pretty dang good way to go. And for that, we're gonna give it 4 out of 5 goats. Like I mentioned earlier, it weighs less than a lot of trail bikes, and that's with the alloy wheels that it comes with. But again, it lacks some of those kind of creature comforts that we've sort of come to expect on bikes like this, like in-frame storage and the ability to run multiple wheel sizes. Now, speaking of wheel sizes, if you're not a big MX fan and prefer a 29-inch wheel front and back, then you'll probably like our first runner-up, which is the Santa Cruz Mega Tower GX Axis. And if you decide you don't quite need so much travel, the Specialized Stump Jumper Evo Expert will always be near and dear to our hearts. Our last 2 categories shift from being focused on riding style to price point. And the first of those is the best budget-oriented enduro bike. For this, we looked for a bike that, yes, listed for substantially less than a lot of other bikes on this list, but also had a durable and reliable part spec that will get you through multiple seasons of riding. Because nothing says value like replacing half your bike after riding it for 1 month, right? Thankfully, that's not the case. It's actually kind of the opposite. There's a lot of direct-to-consumer brands that have really been making a big focus on enduro bikes. And actually, each of the 3 bikes that we've chosen here, our winner and our 2 runner-ups, have all made their way onto a major elite enduro podium over the past year. In the end though, we ended up choosing the YT Capra Core 2. And yes, I know they make a cheaper one, but we felt like this $3,499 model, which by the way is currently $700 off, represented a better value. And we'll get to why in a second. First though, let's talk geometry. Now, the YT Capra is available in both a 29-27.5 mixed wheel setup as well as a full 29er. And just to mix things up, we decided to go with the full 29er this time around. Now, despite the fact that you can get the bike in both wheel sizes, you sadly can't just throw a 27.5-inch wheel on the back of this guy, so you do need to decide which one you want up front. That said, it still does have a geometry adjusting flip chip located in the shock yoke that slackens the head tube from 64.4 degrees down to 64 degrees in its slacker setting. The Capra is available in 5 sizes, and it's actually the first bike on our list to come with a size-specific rear triangle, albeit just barely. Sizes small through large get some super stubby 433mm chainstays. It's actually the shortest of any on our list. And then XL and double XL bump that up just a little bit to 338mm. This short rear end is paired with a relatively short 464mm reach up front. And all this together gives the Capra the shortest wheelbase of the list, making it a great option for freeride focused riders, but likely not as stable and composed at higher speeds. Moving on to the part spec, and unsurprisingly, this is where the Capra really begins to stand out when compared to other bikes on the market. You'll see parts here that it shares with bikes that cost, I don't know, $2,000–$3,000 more. For starters, you're gonna get a 170mm Fox 38 performance fork and Flow X performance shock that delivers 165mm. You'll also get a full SRAM GX drivetrain, including the cassette and Code R brakes. A neat touch that we're not really used to seeing on more value-oriented bikes is a full rental cockpit. And the jury's out on whether or not this will actually improve the bike's performance, but it will surely make you look the part while standing in the lift line. You'll also get a pair of DT Swiss E1900 wheels wrapped in, once again, a Maxxis Assegai up front and a Minion DHR2 in the rear. And while all those components and the Capra's burly alloy frame are definitely going to be able to handle all the abuse you can throw at them, you are going to have to pay a penalty in terms of weight. The Capra is actually the heaviest bike on our list, weighing 36.4 pounds or 15.6 kilograms. Despite its portly weight, we're still going to give the Capra the first full 5 out of 5 goats. And yes, I know this is a direct-to-consumer brand, and because of that, it's definitely able to pack a little bit more value into it. But we think that YT did a really good job of pumping parts into this bike where it matters and not in other places where it doesn't as much. We think the Capra Core 2 would make a great first enduro bike or dedicated bike park rig. If you're looking for the absolute cheapest way to get your hands on an enduro bike, then you should check out the $2,300 Polygon Colossus N7, which has the same frame that just won the Trans-Madeira Enduro race under Polygon Pro rider Dan Wolf. Another bike to consider is the $3,500 Commensal Meta SX V5 Ride that's been finding its way into the finals of almost every major enduro race over the last decade. Shifting gears now from the budget-conscious rider to Mr. Moneybags, because our 5th and final category is the best high-end enduro bike. So what do you look for when money isn't an object? Well, obviously you want a dialed part spec, exquisite frame, but we also kind of wanted to get something that's gonna set itself apart and be a little more unique. And because of that, we've gone ahead and settled on the Atherton A170, which lists for a whopping $10,000. In case you're new to the sport, the Atherton family is one of, if not the most successful names in mountain biking. And a few years ago, started this company to make the best possible bikes based on nearly 20 years of professional racing. The frame is constructed using carbon fiber tubes bonded to titanium lugs, which Atherton claims makes for a stronger bike, but also for a near infinite degree of geometry adjustment when purchasing your bike. The bike is available in a whopping 22 sizes, and if that sounds a little daunting, don't worry. You'll go ahead and work with the team at Atherton to make sure you have a bike custom tailored to your specific riding when you go ahead and make your purchase. For this video, we're gonna go ahead and focus on what they call the 480mm tall frame. As the name would imply, this gets a 480mm reach and 435mm chainstays. But again, each of these can be changed by the millimeter depending on your preference. The bike also comes with a 64-degree head tube angle when paired with a 170mm fork. And while you can make essentially limitless adjustments to the bike before you purchase it, once it's been bonded together, there's no going back, because the Atherton doesn't have any kind of geometry adjustment, nor can you run anything besides the stock mullet wheel set that it comes with. But I guess if that's what G says works best, then who am I to argue? As for part spec, you'll get Fox factory front and back. And you can choose between a 170 or 180 millimeter Fox 38 fork and either a Flow X2 air shock or DHX2 coil shock, both of which deliver 170 millimeter travel. The Atherton A170, as well as every other Atherton bike, uses Dave Weagle's DW6 suspension, which is a 6-bar setup, and that essentially lets them fine-tune various parameters independently of each other, making for a very well-rounded suspension performance. Interestingly, Atherton has chosen not to spec this bike with electronic shifting. Instead, you're going to get the mechanically actuated SRAM XO drivetrain and Hayes Dominion A4 brakes. Lastly, the A171 rolls on Stans Flow EX3 wheels wrapped in Continental Kryptonol tires. The Atherton A171 is anything but normal, and if you're going to spend $10K on a bike, you might as well get yourself something unique. We are going to go ahead and give it 4 out of 5 goats. We love, again, that unique lugged frame, and the customizable geometry literally is better than anything I can think of in the industry, aside from going and getting yourself a custom frame built from a frame builder. That said, the bike's part spec, specifically the alloy wheels and mechanical drivetrain, aren't exactly what you'd expect on a $10,000 bike. Now, if you'd rather get a higher part spec and not quite so many sizing options, then our 2 runner-ups might be up your alley. Up first, we have the Yeti SB160 T3 XO transmission, and lastly, the Trek / 9.9 XX Axis. As usual, we'd love to hear from you what your favorite bike was on this list, and if your favorite bike wasn't on this list, we want to know what it is and why down in the comments. If you haven't done so already, take a quick second to go ahead and like this video, as well as subscribe to the 99 Spokes YouTube channel. And lastly, remember that bikes are for everybody. Have fun out there.